matter?
Who died, Lee?
You!
Detective you?
Not you, you!
Who?
You!
Who?
Do you understand the words that are coming out from my mouth?
Don't nobody understand the words that are coming out of your mouth, man.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. We've got some more comic book industry news, the movie variety, talking about Disney, the MCU, Mr. Bob Chapek, the new CEO of Disney. He cannot catch a break. First, he's got the lawsuit from Scarlett Johansson, which he did not respond to very well, if I might add. And now he's apparently upset the star of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which is supposed to be something very important to Disney and the MCU moving forward as far as Marvel Studios. We're out of the original era of Avengers. You know, Captain America's gone, Iron Man's gone, Hulk is dude bro, like lame ass Hulk, Thor's fat and useless. They need some new stars to come in. Obviously, one of the next generation of stars that was a huge hit was Black Panther himself. Unfortunately, the untimely death of Chadwick Boseman, which is still just heartbreaking, probably threw some wrenches in that plan. But Black Panther itself was an enormous success. You know, launched a new character, immediately hits $1 billion, resonates with almost everybody. Everybody's excited to see that character moving forward, and really captivated a new segment of the audience that perhaps Marvel and Disney didn't feel like they had already. Shang-Chi is supposed to be for the Asian audience what Black Panther is or was for the Black audience. It's supposed to reinvigorate and bring new demographics into the MCU that maybe aren't there already. Now, the MCU is already a worldwide phenomenon. Do they really need this? That can be debated. But that's what they're planning, or what they expected from Shang-Chi, and it's quite apparent that that's not going to happen. We'll get into the details of the box office predictions and all the things that are absolutely hammering this movie and killing what little enthusiasm there is for it, and just it's destined for failure. Let's put it that way. There's no saving it at this point. I hope Disney, and I'm certain that they do, they have a nice insurance policy out on Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings so that they don't completely lose their butts on this one. But what has happened is Mr. Chapek is decided to change the strategy for release for Free Guy, which came out last week, starring Ryan Reynolds, and Shang-Chi, which is coming out next week. Free Guy is a video game movie that's like a holdover from the Fox acquisition. It was being developed and produced for Fox Studios and came over, with that acquisition. They finally put it out. There's good news on that front because it did better than expected. Shang-Chi is the other film that's getting this new theatrical release exclusive period of 45 days before it's brought into Disney Plus, which they had been doing with Black Widow, Cruella, Jungle Cruise. It has been, I imagine, pretty lucrative. And this strategy has been somewhat successful, even with the opening of Black Widow, which we'll get into the details a little bit later in the video. They made an extra $60 million just as far as people shelling out $30 a pop to watch Black Widow on their Disney Plus at home. Cruella, pretty good numbers. Jungle Cruise, that's a rock movie. So these are some pretty big stars, Scarlett Johansson. Now, they did get sued because of this, and I imagine that's why they changed their tune as to what they're going to do, specifically Bob Chapek. And I personally don't believe he deserves what he gets in this one. And this is what he had to say about Shang-Chi and changing of the strategy. He called it an interesting experiment for us, as the film only has a 45-day theatrical window, that being Shang-Chi along with Free Guy. Later on, he says, which had some more clarity into it, the prospect of being able to take a Marvel title to the service after going theatrically for 45 days will be yet another data point to inform our actions going forward on our titles. Saying this release strategy, which is different than what they'd done pre-COVID, it's different what they did with Mulan, which was only on Disney Plus. It's different than what they did with Black Widow, Cruella, Jungle Cruise, which was this hybrid Disney Plus theatrical release simultaneous. They're changing it up, and they're getting a 45-day theatrical window before it comes to Disney Plus for Free Guy, starring Ryan Reynolds, who's a big box office draw, depending on the genre in the film, and Shang-Chi starring Simu Liu, who's supposed to open up doors to the Asian market within the MCU. And that's clearly what he's saying. This is an experiment. We need to see how this will perform. Are we losing money by not offering it same day as on Disney Plus and charging $30? I'm not a big fan of Bob Chapek. I think I'm on Team Scarjo, let's put it that way. And he was the head of Disney, like their theme parks. And fans of Disney World and Disneyland are not fans of Bob Chapek because he was very cheap and he didn't like to fix a lot of things. So there's not a lot of love coming from this end to Bob Chapek, but he has been completely taken out of context and unfairly criticized, specifically by Simu Liu, the Canadian actor born in China that is starring as Shang-Chi in the titular Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. And this is what he said as his response. It was on Twitter, and there's some pictures. "We are not an experiment," referencing what Bob Chapek had said in the original response. "We are the underdog, the underestimated. We are the ceiling breakers. We are the celebration of culture and joy that will persevere after an embattled year. We are the surprise. I'm fired the F up to make history on September 3rd. Join us." Unfortunately for him, the only history they'll be making is the worst box office opening probably in MCU history, lower than an Incredible Hulk, shockingly. Now, there are a lot of factors in this, but this whole "we are not an experiment," Bob Chapek wasn't saying the actors in Shang-Chi are an experiment, or having a Chinese born actor lead in an MCU film is the experiment, or a mostly Asian cast is the experiment. The experiment is to see how the film performs with the 45-day exclusive theatrical release in the time of COVID, because everything has changed. He's being far too sensitive, far too sensitive. And quite frankly, he's being a little bit too big for his britches. Ryan Reynolds got the same treatment. Ryan Reynolds has made a lot of money, especially with like Deadpool and things within the sphere that Simu Liu has. He's an unknown commodity. He's never really been in anything big. He certainly hasn't started anything big. He's mostly done television. He's done a few film projects, but this is supposed to be his big breakout starring role. I don't mind him having a little moxie, but come on, and can you at least cut the guy a break? He's going through a pretty shitty week here. He keeps sticking his own foot in his mouth, and here he's pretty clear what he was talking about, and you're taking him to task, and certainly out of context. I am not the only one who feels like that. Kevin Feige, the man behind Marvel Studios, the man with the Midas touch, he could turn any comic book character into solid gold at the box office. Well, maybe not anymore. It feels like the MCU is dying a kind of a slow death here. We shall see. I don't think there was ever a lot of enthusiasm for Shang-Chi. I thought the trailers were really boring, and the look just didn't look great. But this is what Kevin Feige had to say in response to Simu Liu's comments. He is not a shy man. I think in that particular tweet you can see, and I think everyone does, a misunderstanding. 100%. It was not the intention. The proof is in the movie, and we swing for the fences as we always do with the amount of creative energy we put in and the budget, and there's no expense spared to bring this origin story to the screen. So Kevin Feige saying there's clearly a misunderstanding, and my actions speak louder than any words. I greenlit the film. I cast it. We put the budget into it, and we've marketed it all over the world. They want this to be their Black Panther for the Asian audience. They're not going to get it, but he's certainly, as he says, the proof is in the pudding. They put everything they could behind this to make it a success. It's unfortunate that there are a lot of circumstances besides just the film and the trailer not being very good, and the dwindling energy behind the MCU as far as, we're out of phase 4. We lost a lot of major heroes. There are other contributing factors. I think this probably would have come in on the lower end anyway. And he still stands behind that. And he goes on to kind of start doing that comparison I've talked about throughout this video, comparing it to Black Panther. And this is what Feige had to say to follow that up. When you have the opportunity to showcase a hero that looks like a huge segment of the globe that feels like they haven't been showcased, the magic can happen if you deliver. I think Destin and Simu have delivered for this movie. I do think this is misrepresenting the potential impact that a Shang-Chi could have, like globally, like Black Panther did. There are certainly films being made in Africa, and there's certainly films being made in America by African Americans, and certainly films being made in Europe by Black Europeans. And these things are being made, but Black Panther really reached out and like galvanized these audiences all together in a way nothing has ever been seen before. I don't think Shang-Chi ever had that opportunity, because like you start talking about the Asian like market outside of the US. And you know, I've lived in Korea, I live in the Philippines currently, and I look into these things. There are enormous box offices in Japan, in Korea, in China already. They already have their own franchises. They might not have Marvel movies, but they have, you know, even Korea has their own superheroes. Even the Philippines, we have our own superheroes that are Filipino superheroes. And there have been movies with them. Now, they might not compare to the MCU as far as the production values. And culturally speaking, there's a lot of divergence, you know, within all these markets and stuff too. So I understand that they were swinging for the fences, and that's what they were hoping to achieve with Shang-Chi. It probably was never going to happen because there's already enormous, you know, box office in the movie markets that are ingrained in the cultures here. They already have their big stars and all that stuff. They didn't need a movie to really galvanize like perhaps it felt like the Black community did with Black Panther. That's just my opinion. If you disagree, let me know in the comment section. Definitely want to hear from you guys. So I understand what they were going for. It was probably never going to happen because it quite frankly probably didn't need to happen. There have already been you know, Asian characters that have really done that in Asian franchises. There's been plenty of really cool movies that have been imported from the Chinese, Japanese, Korean markets into the U.S., you know, dubbed over and done huge box office. There were already draws, what I'm saying, as far as like Asian superheroes, you know, in the form of like martial arts movies. Now, as far as the box office, it does not look good. I think it was always going to be difficult for the box office to really hit. And Simu Liu is a Chinese-born actor. You know, he is Canadian, but he's Chinese-born. And they were certainly aiming this at that Chinese box office when they went into production. Now, that was certainly pre-COVID. And this is what they had to say in the South China Morning Post just a few days ago. Marvel Studios' 3 biggest superhero films in 2021 remain uncertain in mainland China as the country relaunched strict control measures to battle its widest COVID-19 outbreak since Wuhan. It is not in a good state. And there is no sign of a release yet for Black Widow, which has done pretty good worldwide. We'll get that to in a second. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings and Eternals, the next MCU film, which are released internationally in September and November, respectively, may never see the light of day in China either. Kind of predicting you won't see any of those movies. And there's certainly some contention between China and the Western world right now. So they're not exactly motivated to just bring in our cinema and make us a lot of money at their box office, which is pretty much closed down at the moment anyway. Now, the good news as far as the box office is Free Guy, starring Ryan Reynolds, beat box office expectations. They were, you know, the high end was coming in at about, I think, $22 million. It did $28.4 million. And overseas, it did another $22.5 million in 41 markets, not including China, for a global of $51 million. Absolutely blows the Suicide Squad away. But if you look at that $51 million, and it did overperform, it's not an MCU movie, it's still less than Black Widow made just on Disney Plus subscribers purchasing the movie, which is $60 million, without the theater numbers, which is another $160 million for Black Widow. So it overperformed, but it's still getting pantsed by Black Widow, which is kind of seen as a bit of a, it's not a disaster, but it was disappointing. And according to Box Office Pro, which is the site that does a lot of box office tracking, Shang-Chi is gearing into between a 35 and 55 million domestic opening. That is a wide range. $20 million when your high end is 55 million. Even if it hits the high end of $55 million, it's still going to fall almost like 30 million short of Black Widow, which did 80 million domestically, on top of another 60 million from Disney Plus. Black Widow was going nowhere. The character's already dead. We know that Scarlett Johansson's run as Black Widow in the MCU has come to an end. Now, Kevin Feige did hint that maybe she could come back. But like, as far as everyone knew going into Black Widow, you were watching a movie about a character that was already dead, and then this goes nowhere. Except maybe they were going to introduce a character or two that you might see later on in another movie that doesn't feature Black Widow. Shang-Chi is supposed to be like the dawning of a new era, along with Eternals, where they're bringing in these new heroes, and it's supposed to catapult the MCU forward. And it is going to get completely annihilated at the box office. Black Widow did $80 million while being released simultaneously on Disney Plus for an extra $60 million. Shang-Chi is going to be lucky if it does 55 or 60 million. Lucky if it does. That's got to be a huge disappointment. I know that Kevin Feige and the execs at Marvel Studios really obviously had faith in this, but their expectations were way overblown on what this film could do in comparison, like with the Black Panther. It was never going to be as culturally relevant as Black Panther was. It was never going to start uniting, people under like a Shang-Chi movement. Not that there was a Black Panther movement, but there's certainly enthusiasm worldwide from audiences that felt like they were seeing something for the first time. Sure, you're seeing an MCU movie led by an Asian character for the first time, but these movies have kind of been around for a long time within Asian cinema as well. It wasn't as unique as Black Panther was for the MCU. And I think they misjudged that. And you can see in comparison to a character whose run is done, and we're seeing a story earlier than that, it's getting absolutely annihilated. Shang-Chi was probably never going to take off. You throw COVID-19 on top of that, you throw this new strategy where they're not going into Disney Plus on top of that, you take the fact that the lead actor is relatively unknown. He seems to be not very happy with his bosses at Disney. Disney's Q rating feels like it's going down. You got the Scarlett Johansson lawsuit on top of that. You got the Delta variant, and you have the entire Chinese cinema essentially shut down for a film that was kind of aimed at that market, and it might never ever get released there. They probably were counting on a large portion of the box office total to come from that Chinese box office. Everything was against Shang-Chi, and unfortunately this is not a fairy tale. This isn't the little engine that could. This is the real world. A movie that was likely to never meet expectations is gonna just come nowhere close to him, and that's too bad. I don't know Simu Liu. I'm sure he's a nice guy. I think he mistook a quote from Bob Chapek, took him to task when he didn't need to. I think Kevin Feige did the right thing and kind of going in there and clarifying it and saying he still supports Simu Liu and the project. But we'll see the character again because it is a shared universe. They'll blame this on COVID, and they'll blame this on the Chinese box office never coming up. And then they'll get the shot of reality that this character was never going to be a big, enormous character for the MCU moving forward, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but we'll see the character again, but this is going to be a huge disappointment. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.